Rallying the troops here. I'm going to ask my AV people to nod the webcast camera if the webcast is actually on, and maybe turn on the lights here for us so everyone's not here in the dock. Hold on a second. Jonathan, there's no lights on the front. Go ask the AV guy to turn on the lights. Yeah, well, thanks. It'll be kind of like mood lighting for the initial part of it. So is everyone all set? So we'll start. So you're numero uno, and you can. Ah, there we go. Hey there, everyone. Good morning. 早上好. I won't start off with my Chinese New Year greeting because we already did that at the last meeting. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum here at the Wilson Center. The China Environment Forum is now Sweet 16, in its 16th year of putting on meetings, putting out publications, acting as really an information clearinghouse on energy and environmental issues in China. I've been hanging out here for 14 years and having a jolly good time. And a lot of the work that we've done over the years has focused on U.S. China clean energy cooperation. In fact, the Blue Moon Fund has been very kind over the last few years, giving us support to put on meetings, to put out publications, and try to get more and more conversations started on how the U.S. and China can work together on clean energy. The pollution blanketing North China, a lot of it coming from coal, adds yet more urgency to this kind of cooperation. And so last month I had a meeting featuring some folks from WWF and some energy researchers that had looked into questions of whether renewable energy could be the answer to some of China's energy challenges. And it was an interesting meeting. A lot of you came. It was fun, good discussion. But, you know, I still kept nagging in the back of my mind. I still kept, you know, coal. Coal remains king in China, at least for the near future. And questions of whether or not cleaner coal kind of technologies, CCUS and others. So I gathered a bunch of rather smart people who can wax poetic about coal, from what I understand, and other non-renewable energy technologies. So have here today, I have Julio Friedman he's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Clean Coal, Office of Fossil Energy in the Department of Energy. And so he's responsible for DOE's R&D program on the advanced fossil energy systems, large demo projects. And when I said wax poetic about cleaner coal, you're the man. Mm-hmm. He's a practitioner. He used to work at Lawrence Liver National Laboratory. He's done lots of research. You've got the bio. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But he's done lots of research on smart grid, CO2 enhanced oil recovery. He knows his stuff. So he's gonna kick us off today. And I do love your opening slide. Very beautiful. We live in a time of energy abundance. So then we have Ming Song, who is a repeat offender here at the Wilson Center. You came here a few years ago, and we had a grand old time. You were advertising Coke and carbon capture use and sequestration all at once. I was wondering if you got support for that. But anyway, so Ming Song, he works at the Clean Air Task Force. He's their Beijing head, and he's professional experience is over 30 years in energy and IT industries. He used to work for Shell in 25 years and advises Chinese government, and he's a senior economic advisor for the city of Daqing, and just what I've been really struck with over the years is the unique role that you have played at Clean Air Task Force in building partnerships between U.S. and Chinese business communities. Gov to gov is good, business to business, another good piece. Taya Smith, she's the managing director at Garnet Strategies, where she provides advice on working with China on clean energy, conservation, and climate change to nonprofit and commercial clients. She used to hang out over in the State Department, advising Todd Stern on climate issues, doing more than hanging out, mover and shaker, if I dare say. She was a staff member of Secretary Hank Paulson's on the senior management team, and I fancy that we could see her fingerprints over a lot of the stuff in the S&ED and the 10-year framework. And you're still working with Hank Paulson in the Paulson Institute in Chicago. That's enough for intros. We're going to get started. And your job out there is to stay alert and get ready to ask these people difficult questions at the end. So, Julio, please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a delight to be here. This is one of my very favorite topics. It's actually two of my favorite topics combined. And so I'm happy to go about it, and I'm that much happier for seeing some good friends and august personages around the room. including the panel here. One of the things that is often not said or not recognized broadly is that we are in a new age of energy abundance. And almost all of that abundance is actually fossil energy. There continues to be great progress in renewables. There continues to be great progress in efficiency. But particularly in the United States and China, we are in an era of tremendous fossil energy abundance. Coming out of our current recession into the next wave of economic growth, this provides a once-in-a-lifetime, or at least a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build and an opportunity to do. One of the things that I'm passionately committed to is trying to figure out what the best way to harness this age of abundance is. In thinking about China, I want to start with this abundance in a particular way. Most people in the room know this. China gets about 70% of its energy from coal, gets about 80% of its power from coal. It is the largest coal producer and user in the world. Right now we're up at about 4 billion tons a year. For those of you who aren't used to thinking in the unit billion tons, 1 billion tons is about the weight of all the human beings on Earth. So China uses 4 times that every year in coal. It is just immense, and that effort and that resource has powered their economic growth. It's made them the second largest economy in the world. It's brought 100 million people out of poverty and more. It is their endowment, it is their legacy, and they harness that abundance in a very particular way. Towards that end, we see CCUS as a critical component for China's long-term clean energy strategy. And we'll have a chance to talk more about that in just a bit. When we talk about the need to reduce emissions globally, this is sort of the backdrop. This is one of 12 conventional equilibrium analyses. This is the EIAs. The basis of an equilibrium economic analysis is it tries to reduce cost. Most people don't know how much innovation goes into these things. The business as usual scenario typically has a quadrupling of solar and nuclear in it. It has dramatic cost reductions through technology development and improvement. That's baked into these analyses. Still, this is where you end up with. You end up with an all of the above result. You end up with the fact that you have to do all technologies and all efforts in all contexts. And the basic reason why is because in some markets, one technology is cheaper than another. And that finding is very, very hard to get around. All of the global equilibrium analyses have a very conventional result that looks like this. MIT's, EPRI's, Stanford's, the EIAs, the IEAs, the World Energy Council, YASA, they all show the same kind of thing. One of the things this means is that if you want to make deep abatements, you can't do it with any one technology. If you want to make deep abatements, you have to use all of the above, and you have to have a way to manage the emissions from fossil energy, period. That is the largest portion of my program. I've got about a $400 million R&D program. Almost all of that is focused on this particular question. But one last thing on this. Most of these analyses give you a result that looks like this for CCS. You need about 12 to 20% of the solution space is CCS, depending on the analysis. Some of the solution space is also fuel switching from coal to gas. So coal to gas doesn't obviate CCS. Still in some markets, that's the best solution space. Not surprisingly, the President's Climate Action Plan features this. It really is an all of the above strategy. It is the central plank of the mitigation strategy, is that we need to progress into an energy-rich world that is low in carbon. And in order to do this, you go for all of the above. CCS and CCUS, broadly, are central to this, and I do mean literally. If you look in the middle of the document, that's where the CCS piece is. It does also include all of the above. It includes major efficiency efforts, it includes renewables, it includes fuel switching with gas, it includes nuclear, and the administration and the Secretary of Energy are chasing all of these aggressively, and I can't stress that enough. There are 3 planks to the Climate Action Plan. The second plank is adaptation and resilience. I'm not going to talk about that today. The third plank is international partnerships. It is broadly recognized that it is a multilateral world, and we need to act accordingly. In that, China is identified as a critical pathway partner. There are other critical pathway partners in the CCUS world, countries that are aggressive developers of technology and actors. Norway, Canada, Australia, the UK are examples of that, but it really ends up being the United States and China in this space doing what they need to do. A quick overview of what's going on in the world for those of you who don't think about this every day. This is what the world looked like in terms of large CCS projects about 10 years ago. There were no large CCS projects, or one or two, but effectively it looked like this. Since then, there have been 6 large projects that have come online. These are things like Sleipner and Weyburn and Snowvit and this class of projects around the world. We've harnessed what we know about enhanced oil recovery. We've now got about 85 projects worldwide doing CO2 enhanced oil recovery. That provides the technical basis for all of this. The DOE has led a series of regional partnerships. We've done 23 total injections so far, and we've got another 9 large-scale injections on the books, and we're trying to bring as many of those forward as we can in the next phase of the partnership. There have been 4 international R&D efforts. I want to draw your attention to the Frio in Texas. That was sort of the first of the bunch, but these have allowed us to validate our science and feel good about the technical pronouncements that we make. And the yellow stars are the projects that are coming online now. Those are places, we've been sort of judicious about this, where there's steel in the ground, where something is actually in the operational or the construction phase. These are the units of international partnership. These are the units of innovation. Large-scale projects are kind of where it's at. With that, a quick overview of the U.S. large-scale projects. We have 8 on the books, a combination of conventional congressional appropriations and stimulus money, ARRA funding. This is meant to, again, be as much of all of the above as we can get. We have new builds and retrofits. We have industrial and power projects and polygeneration. We're doing pre-combustion capture, post-combustion capture, and oxy-firing projects. We're doing EOR and saline aquifer. We're really trying to cover as much of the landscape as we possibly can. And this represents, all told, something on the order of $4.5 billion of public investment. I can't say this enough. That investment is part of a climate strategy. It is aimed at emissions reductions explicitly. To give you a sense of where we are today, just a couple of pictures. This is what Kemper County, Mississippi looked like in 2010. This is what it looks like today. That's what you get for $4 billion. That plant's coming online in a few months. This is our first project off the blocks, Port Arthur, Texas, the Air Products project. We are about to hit 1 million tons total injection this year in April, and we expect to mark that milestone substantively. Again, we have actually been capturing CO2 and injecting it from this site for about a year. This is the Archer Daniels Midland site. This is CO2 capture from a biofuels refinery. You need to disabuse yourself of the notion that this is just about coal-fired power plants. This will come back in spades in the Chinese context, because the best opportunities for CCS in China are actually in the industrial sector. It's where you can act fastest and best. But we've already injected 750,000 tons here. We're about to kick off the large-scale 1 million ton a year project and capture all of the emissions from this biofuels site. In the regulatory landmark as well, this will be the first Class 6 well permitted in the United States, or for that matter, anywhere. I do want to mention one component of CCUS, which is the U. Today, really, the best and biggest options we have involve enhanced oil recovery. There are other options that are technically feasible, that are promising, and which we're developing, but if you want to bring it to the bank today, you bring it through CCUS. Something that's not said enough in the United States context, we are short CO2 in this country for EOR. If we had it everywhere we want it, we'd have tens of billions of barrels of additional production. We'd also have the tax revenues that come from that. We'd also have the jobs that come with that. It's also critical that early projects take advantage of this, because you need it to get the financing up. You don't actually get the project off the ground if you don't have the EOR today. 3/4 of the DOE's projects are EOR projects on that basis. Anyways, as I'd said before, we see CCUS as a critical component for China's long-term clean energy strategy. One of the reasons why is because CCUS actually provides the anchor infrastructure that you need to develop. Right now, the United States has 3,000 miles of CO2 pipelines. They've been in operation for 40 years, and they've been managed over that time by the Department of Transportation. The way that pipeline network has developed is sort of what you see here. There's a series of regional pipeline networks that have evolved from localized resource, a combination of naturally occurring carbon dioxide, anthropogenic CO2 that was cheap and easy to capture, and enhanced oil recovery opportunities. That means that you have the fairways, you have a population that's comfortable with these CO2 networks, and this is a basis on which you expand and grow. This is exactly how the natural gas network grew in the United States. It started with these small regional networks, which then matured into the large hubs and interconnects that we have today. The good news is that China seems to agree on the need for both development and deployment of CCUS and other clean energy technologies. This is not a hard sell. They understand that this is important for their future for a number of reasons, which I'll get into. Again, China seems to agree on the need for both development and deployment of CCUS and other clean coal technologies. Right now, there continues to be debates about cost. There continues to be a debate about timing. But the fundamental debate on should China pursue CCS is done. And there are major things that have happened recently that fall into that bin, and I'll explain that in a minute. Part of this is by the recognition of where we started. 70% of their energy and 80% of their power comes from coal. If that's your backdrop, you have to think seriously about CCS as a clean energy technology. One of the things that China has pursued pretty aggressively is the technology development in this space. And they put a lot of money and a lot of effort into developing advanced capture technology, and they've put a certain amount of money into scale up and demonstration of these technologies. They've got one large demo project that's coming into operation soon, and they have a handful of small pilots that are going on around the country. In addition to that, they've put a lot of money into the R&D component, both in the subsurface and the surface. The fact that they can do this is premised on their era of abundance. It has to do with the fact that they're a global economic powerhouse, so they actually have the latitude and wherewithal to do this. It's also a country run by engineers. They know how to read an Arrhenius plot, and so they sort of not only understand what the work involved is here, but they understand what the implications of climate change are from a technical perspective. Right now, the CCUS landscape in China is changing dramatically. In part, this has been highlighted, as Jennifer said at the beginning, with the environmental challenges which they currently face. The talk in Beijing these days is around the weather. That's the turn of phrase. Don't you love our beautiful Beijing weather? And they're not trying to be glib, it's just the way that they've internalized the fact that they have extremely dangerous air on a regular basis. Not that long ago, highways were shut down in Beijing because drivers couldn't see the cars in front of them. When that's your backdrop, things are an issue. It still, however, is a challenge to answer the question, what do you do about this? Or why hasn't China already cleaned up their air? They have the money, they have their technology. These are sort of, open-ended, important issues to answer. Pursuant of that, and this recognition around the climate change urgency, there's a set of policy changes which are coming forward. I'm not going to talk about these in depth. I'm sure the rest of the people on the panel will really dive into this. Part of this is been driven by United States engagement, and I can't overstate that enough. Things like this new climate change working group, a bilateral agreement through the State Department, is an important one. That, among other things, I think allowed the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission, to assert its primacy on CCS, which is, as those of you who are China scholars know, is a major, major deal. These policy changes are also enmeshed in the shakeup that's going on in the state-owned enterprises, in particular the big three oil and gas companies. And they're trying to figure out what all of this means. So it's a very dynamic landscape right now in terms of economics and policy. They also, as I said before, continue to make technology progress. GreenGen is now operational. It's actually producing power. It is the 250 megawatt IGCC plant in Tianjin, and they are in the construction phase for their CO2 capture pilot demonstration in phase 2. They continue to make progress on post-combustion capture and oxy-fired combustion and CO2 injections. all of this means something specific, and I want to be clear about this. We see ways to expand the existing U.S.-China collaborations through enhanced commercial engagements and through activities like exchanges and study tours. These activities are possible because of the dynamic policy landscape, because of the technology progress, and because of the recognition that this is important on so many levels. There are already a handful of platforms to do this. The Strategic New and Economic Dialogue remains the largest of these. Again, I'm not going to talk about this. There are people in the room who understand that much better than I. But it is an important platform that will be happening this June in Beijing. Many secretaries and ministers will be there. This is really going to be a time when a lot can get done. In addition, it'll be the second meeting of the Climate Change Working Group. The last Climate Change Working Group was able to lay out the ground rules. Right now, they're seeking to make announcements to identify specific progress. Let me say explicitly, we will discuss these and related issues with our Chinese counterparts next week. They will be here in Washington for the U.S. China Climate Change Working Group. And there's a series of meetings at the State Department where that will be discussed. It's important to note that they brought CCUS to the United States in this framework. They came to us and said, we want CCS to be part of this discussion. There is a key research and development platform. This is the U.S. China Clean Energy Research Centers, the CERC. There's nothing like it in the world, and again, people here have been very active on that particular front, and their efforts are very, very welcome. There's 3 planks. Coal plus CCUS is one of 3. Also efficient buildings, also efficient vehicles. Something that's important about that is that there's IP protections that are baked into the technical management plan. And that's a first of a kind effort, and that is now something which can be expanded upon and built. Right now, we are renegotiating what to do in the CERC in terms of extension, expansion, and revision. Watch this space. There will be announcements soon. And also long-lived agreements. The Fossil Energy Protocol is one of these. The Oil and Gas Industrial Forum is another. These are platforms in which there are bilateral engagements between U.S. and Chinese companies, U.S. and Chinese researchers, and that government-to-government, industrial, commercial engagement really is the right pairing. The R&D piece is important, it's sustaining, but it's not actually enough to activate. With companies involved and with government agencies involved, we're at the point now where big things can happen. To close with 2 quick thoughts. One is this is the pathway we're on for large projects. This comes from the Global CCS Institute. By the end of the decade, we should be expecting 100 million tons a year of CO2 injection. You know, this is not kid stuff anymore. We're in the age of commercialization. And this is what it looks like around the world now. We've got Quest going up in Canada. We've got Lula just up and running now in Brazil. I would never thought that I'd say this. There's large CCS projects going on in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They're going to be online in a year to inject about 1 million tons of carbon dioxide. And with it, Emirates Steel is doing the same thing. We've got 2 large projects now in the Middle East. And that, again, reflects the growing importance and the growing opportunity here. The Mongstad project, largest CCS project in the world, is coming online in a year and a half. It's Gorgon, 6 million tons a year of injection, which is about 1 large coal-fired power plant, and GreenGen in China. And so one of the things that China is looking at is how they think about this technology development as they enter the League of Nations and try to chart a broader international path. How they act in this space around clean energy, and particularly clean energy and fossil, is something that they think deeply about, and we are eager to partner with them more. With that, I turn it back to the chair.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, some applause here real quick. Just interject while we have the slide. So is DOE involved in all of these projects that are pictured there?
Most of them,
Most of them.
yes.
And you're monitoring them too, because it's a
Yes.
lot of good lessons learned.
Let me also say it's my personal wish to be involved in all of them. And this is something which we are discussing with all of our international counterparts.
That's exciting. Okay, I'm going to shift the PowerPoint over to Ming Songs. Sorry. You ready? If you pass in the clicker. All right, show's yours, sir.
Well, good morning, and I don't know how many of you know about Clean Air Task Force. I will very briefly go into Clean Air Task Force is a nonprofit NGO. We trying. You will ask, why is the NGO playing in this? We are trying to accelerate the deployment. I typically would say that we engage those people who has power, like Julio, those who have money, many of the industrial represented, like ExxonMobil is represented here, those who have project needs, those who have technology, and we put them all together to actually do projects that will accelerate the cleaning up the environment. So that's our role, and we're working with many different partners. And Julio already indicated China has its challenges, and I think U.S. is the one to put up the PM 2.5 machine in our embassy in Beijing that started now as outcry from the Chinese that we really need to clean up the air. You can't say it's a fog anymore. It's more than that. So with that, and it's really the climate change, it's right at the forefront. And CCUS, I would say about 6 years ago, Julio was with me in China. We have a group that coined the phrase CCUS, because in China, just saying CCS, it's not enough. And they said, we don't have a carbon price, so we stick the U in between, and the term CCUS really stick. China at the time said, well, you U.S. guys want U.S., I don't like that, and they used the term CCSU, it didn't catch. So good thing the CCUS term did indeed catch. And it's widely recognized as the right thing to do, because China, their roughly 70% of their energy come from coal, and 80% of their power generated from coal. A power plant, usually in the US, it's about 50 years life. So China's fleet of power plants are very new. And even if you have a coal cap, it's not going away anytime soon. Probably will continue to run next 40 years or so. And what do we do with that? That's critical point. And the other thing is that China continue to grow, and they continue to build more coal plants and other plants. Coal is still going to be dominant energy in China, and there's no way around it. And we are trying to help them develop shale gas like United States, but it's, China can do things cheaper and faster. It took United States about 30 years to develop the shale gas industry. China can do it cheaper, faster, maybe 10 years. And within that 10 years, what do we do? Coal. Mm-hmm. There's no other choice. How about renewables? Yes, China is growing about 100% a year, which is really tremendous growth rate. But the base is so small, you got long ways to go to have a big impact on the climate change issue. So it's really need to be all of the above that, as Julio has keep pointing out, we are helping China not only in the clean coal, but we also helping them development of shale gas, development of nuclear, renewables. Renewables need to have energy storage to be more effective, and also energy efficiency. So we are helping in all the above. But one of the key things is coal is because it's dominant, so we have to pay full attention to that and continue to help them in that. So we need to also help China together to get these done, because the way I see it, United States tend to be more innovative. We have better management system. We can run things more procedurally, more optimized. But China can do things quicker, cheaper. They have more engineers than we do. But collectively, we, meaning U.S. and China, work together. It's for better for the world, because we are the two largest emitters of CO2. We probably account more than half of all the global CO2, the two countries. And if we can really make things better, it's better for the world. And our role as CATF really is a catalyst to accelerate all these, to make it faster. And as any new development, initial, it's more expensive. The second one is much cheaper. The third one, it's another 15% lower. So if we do it faster and the potential, we can demonstrate the feasibility, not only technical feasibility, but economic feasibility, much better, much faster, and can be repeated all over the world. So natural gas, it's a little bit better than coal, but it has its challenges, and we are trying to continue to help China develop shale gas. China has potentially equal amount of shale gas potential, but it really takes our experience and technology and to help China develop these unconventional resources. Otherwise, a typical major oil and gas player who say, well, if I can make a lot of money doing the conventional, it's less risk. Why would I put my money and attention onto unconventional? It's difficult to sell. So in the United States, it tends to be small, medium players do the shale gas. And China doesn't have small, medium players. So we need to help China to think differently and maybe allow small, medium oil and gas players. Maybe how do we get them to even the large SOEs, can they think small, play small, and attention? So there's a lot of things we can help. But one of the things, most of our panelists here been in China a long time. When you point a finger one way, there's three pointing right back at you. That's not the right way to do. And you don't tell China this is what to do. It's really, we need to have proper platforms, as Julio pointed out. How do we really work together? How do we respect each other? And China, their people are very smart. The moment you don't respect them, they don't respect you. But they have much more polite ways doing that, and a lot of Caucasians don't understand. They have 3,000 ways to say no without saying the word no. And that's not the place you want to be. I mean, you really want to have trust each other, real partnership, and I think Julio and Taya is really working together with us, really want to develop that kind of thing. And nuclear, China is building more nuclear than anybody else on Earth. And even though the technology come from one of the most prominent one is Westinghouse, even though it's owned by Toshiba, but we count it as American technology. And it's really need to continue growth and be helping in that arena as well. Especially we need to have fourth generation small modular reactors, all those, to be safer, more inherently safe technology. And we're working with China as well, because even though China is building the new fleet of nuclear power plants, they don't really have a whole lot of experience operating those. We don't want operator mistakes. Any mistake in nuclear is no good, not for anybody. So we help companies work together so that Chinese operator can physically work in United States in our power plants, that side-by-side training for a few months so that they have a hands-on experience. They go back in China when the new plant is there. It's much safer because I think just like car, if you can teach them how to drive a car, not until you get behind the wheel, actually drive a long time, you don't have the right experience, you're going to make mistakes. We want a prevention, prevent that kind of mistakes. So that's one of the key programs. For example, Duke and Huanan, others that are working. So I won't go into, this is a salmon, happened to be my hometown, Ningbo. It's building the nuclear power plant. It's a Westinghouse technology. And as Julio pointed out, China is doing extensive R&D as well, and they want to step out in the world, and it's a win-win for both United States and China to work together. And these are some of the pictures that how we have put together. For example, one of the pictures here is the chairman of AEP and chairman of Duke together with me at working together. As a nonprofit, we help Duke partner with Huanan. We also help AEP partner with another major like State Grid in China. And of course, people challenge me and say, Ming, you're working with Duke. How come you can be working with AEP? I said, we're a nonprofit. We are neutral. So I have the two chairmen. They're both smiling together with me. So they're happy. I'm happy. So that's what we want to make sure. I always saying that for sustainable development, you have to be really green. Green in the sense of conventional green we thinking, but then another green is the color of our dollar. You got to have dollar to continue to substantiate. And that's one of the focus we trying to put partnerships together. It's a win-win situation, so all will be happy in doing so, like the smiling face here. So we want to really do get, and these some of the examples. I won't go into, some of the, there's many that we are trying to get them work together, but the companies, I will hold it business confidential. I will not share until they're ready to share. So the logos you see here is those already in the open. There's many in the pipeline that we continue to work with. And CCUS, I think, we are helping. One example, as Julio pointed out, the Summit project is in Texas. We're doing a project, Summit is doing a project in Texas. They use coal to gasify and they capture, they generate electricity and make fertilizer. They capture 90% of the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. And China is providing finances and EPC service to the project. And the project is in Texas, and jobs are created in the United States. because that's where the project is. So it's win-win-win all the way around. Also, they're using German technology, so Europeans are happy as well. So that's what we are trying to do. On top of catalyzing these partnerships, we also do technical exchange workshops, and also in the shale gas, we're trying to provide advanced practices the best way, because in the shale gas development, you don't want methane leaks, or we don't want them to pollute the water. So we help them to develop the best practices, how to monitor, how to work together. So these are things that we're helping all in different areas. So I won't go into details, and I'm going to open to questions later. So thank you.
Okay, good. Some applause. Okay, so Taya, you have, I'll get your picture. She has 2 pictures. You want those pictures up?
Sure.
Why don't you start?
Well, so just in case any of you are holding out this hope that there's a great future for, is this on? Is this all right?
Yeah, you just have to point it to you.
Got it. You're hoping that renewables really are going to be the answer to it all. I thought we'd just kind of beat this dead horse a little bit and pull back and just say, why is China so focused on energy growth for a moment? So China, of course, as you all know, is the story of the 21st century. In 2013, China's GDP growth alone was larger than its entire economy in 1994. So if you can imagine how much coal it's taken to grow that, you're beginning to get a sense. Roughly 20% of humanity is in China. About 12% of the global economy. It will be the largest economy by 2030. Average of 10% growth over the last 30 years. That's never happened anywhere before. And an emerging middle class that's the size of the U.S. So what this means for the Chinese government is a whole lot of pressure to continue that type of growth. You've heard a million times that 300 million people have been pulled out of poverty through China's economic growth. And that means that there's approximately 1 billion more people waiting their turn. And I can't imagine a more difficult job than to be a member of the Chinese government, especially at the high ranks where you have this pressure of all of these people waiting for their turn to move up. Now, as Julio and Ming have both suggested, that's a great thing until you discover that all of the work you've been doing to grow the economy has really done bad things to the environment, and now the people complain about the environment as well. So not only do you want growth, but you also want to have a clean, safe environment. To me, the best example to kind of get a sense of what China's been doing are in these 2 pictures. So this is Shanghai in 1987, and this is Shanghai last year. It's just an incredible difference, and you can see with everybody expecting their city to be looking like this, that there's not going to be a way to slow things down. To kind of put out there, what are the major areas? I think Julio started talking a little bit. You know, China's 70% of its energy comes from coal. Well, the major energy consumption in China, 72% is from industry. About 14% of the consumption comes from residential, and about 14% from transportation. In terms of coal consumption, right now the world, I guess in 2011, sorry, not right now, but in 2011 figures we have, the world consumed 4.3 billion tons of coal. China, that was without China, China itself consumed 3.8 billion tons of coal. So it's almost rivaling the world for how much coal is there. However, because of environmental factors, climate change pieces, many different components coming together, there's been a real decision to switch away from that policy to diversify from coal. It's the right strategy, but it's still a challenge. So just to compare a couple of numbers, in 2005, coal was 69% of the source of China's energy. And by 2010, it actually had gone in the right direction, 66%. But let's take a look at the alternative. Renewables was 0.1% in 2005. By 2010, despite all the focus on solar and wind and other things, renewables had gotten to 0.4% of China's energy mix. So we got a long, long way to go there. And as Ming is saying, shale gas might be a solution in the future, but it's certainly not going to be close. And even from the best sources we've heard, right from Sinopec and Fu Chenyu, he's like, 10 years would be a stretch for China to really have a serious natural gas boom. So all of that says we want to focus in on what can we do to deal with coal, with fossils, with all of these traditional forms of energy. As Julio is pointing to, we've got this incredible energy abundance, and we are lucky enough to be able to try to figure out some new ways to use it. So we think about this from two different sides. One is on, as we were talking about, the CCUS piece. So how do you actually capture the carbon dioxide that's produced? And the other one is, what do you do with it once you get it? So EOR, as we know, has been a very profitable, I guess very is the wrong term, but anyway, a profitable way to look at it. And is seen as a real transition that hopefully through an enhanced oil recovery, we can help reduce the costs of CCS overall. But then there's also been a lot of focus on ways that you can utilize this. I spend a lot of my time working with businesses, companies that have the absolute breakthrough technology. When I left government, sort of had the opportunity after running the SED to choose which area did I want to work on. Did I want to work on trade and chicken parts? Did I want to focus on...
And you didn't do that?
It was really appealing, that 36-month thing around the beef. It was a very appealing part, and plus all the chicken feet that go to China. But you realize very quickly that there are the energy in the U.S. and sort of, no pun intended, but the excitement around solving things really was coming from the clean energy sector. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs who have the solution to the world, to climate change as well as energy security and a number of other things. And they're just great, fun, wonderful people to work with. So I highly recommend the field. And obviously, Jennifer's tapped into this for a long time. But there's a lot of really interesting things going on. Now, 95% of those technologies are not going to result in what they said they were going to. However, there's a good chunk of them that are really doing some interesting things out there. And what we've discovered in the U.S. Is that the market for these clean energy technologies is not growing at the rate that the innovation here is growing. And so there's been a lot of seeking for different markets to help finance and fund these technologies, as well as finding a market to actually utilize them, with the hope that the U.S. will be catching up in the near-term future. And so what that means is exactly why Ming has been so busy working with CATF and others, is basically that we have a great opportunity to take advantage of China's market, China's liquidity and capital, and the desire both from the Chinese government side, but also from the Chinese people, that push to really do something useful. So a lot of my time is working with these companies that have technologies we really think are going to go somewhere, and saying, okay, how do we access Chinese capital? How can we get into the Chinese market now? So to talk just quickly about a few pieces, everyone hasn't gotten too deep into the U.S. government side. All of you work in China, you're familiar with it, you know that having the Chinese stamp of approval on a relationship, especially between businesses, can be the difference between a make or a break. And so we've got some great programs which are all about stamping approval, whether it be an academic relationship or a business to business or a business to local government or something in there. One of those is that Casey worked on extensively when she was in government on eco-partnerships. While in the U.S. it's a bit of a laugh in that you really don't get anything from the U.S. government other than asked to fill out forms. On the Chinese side, it actually makes a difference, and that NDRC will get in there and support the process. We've got the 10-year cooperative framework on energy and environment, which again is one of those things that the U.S. has sort of dropped aside, but in China, it still works. It's the only forum that they have which brings together all of the different parts of the Chinese government and requires them all to work together in a cooperative way. And since it was approved by their president, they still listen to it quite closely. So it's one of those things that really can be utilized and quite helpful, and actually could be very helpful for the climate change working group that Julio was talking about as well, in terms of trying to get the right players to the table at the right time, which continues to be a challenge in the U.S.-China relations there. The CERCs are probably one of the best examples of a real successful technology collaboration. David Sandalo did a phenomenal job in setting that up. The IP pieces in it still have yet to be tested in a significant way, but that, is all a wonderful breakthrough, and we'll push it forward. And then, as Julio's mentioned, the long-term relationships. There's, I think, 56 at least different MOUs of cooperation between the U.S. government and the Chinese government. They allow for different levels of engagement from NGOs and from the private sector. It's not all just government to government. Some of it's government to government. Some of it's government to government where enlightened government people try to pull in outside experts. But that is all constantly in motion. And so for you guys to take advantage of that is really a matter of sticking your oar in and getting to know people like Julio and others in the government well, so that they can understand where your expertise could actually help them out. I would say that the classic thing for every administration coming in is they all want to do something new. And every secretary who arrives in his job, he's like, what am I going to do to make the world a better place for the 4 years that I'm here? And the one thing that they all forget is that the only new thing that could really be done is to pick up the pieces of things that have been done before and follow through with them. So the CERC, we all want to be very watchful and pushing very hard when the next administration comes in to make sure that doesn't fall off the rails. Because that's an easy kind of thing to say, it's China, who knows how the politics will work in the US. Maybe we want to, step away from that. We don't want to put any money, even though the money doesn't go to China. It just is one of those things that you could easily drop. So from a lobbying perspective and from a pressure perspective, one of our jobs for all of us is to make sure that people understand the continuity, these long-term relationships, the relationship between MEP and EPA are critically important to us being able to work in China. And the reality is, China might have a change of government. They might go through things, but they don't drop things the same way that we do. And so when they look at it, they're like, what happened to this? I thought we had this agreement between our presidents. And we're like, yeah, but that was the last president. And now all of our leadership has changed. So this is one of the areas that we want to focus on, making sure that people understand the value of these different programs, agendas. Eco-partnerships is something that has survived through. The SNED is in a different form, but it has continued because the Chinese and the U.S. side said, hey, we need something like this. It fills a gap. But we're certainly all going to be very watchful for 2016 to make sure that we're supporting and trying to have some continuity, not just in the people, like Mark, who worked for so many years in DOE, you need that continuity of people working on these issues, but you also want continuity of what we're actually working on. So I'll get off of my soapbox there, but I think it's an important piece to consider. Just to talk for a moment about the effectiveness of the U.S. government, we have out there right now one of the best examples we've ever seen of how the U.S. government can collaboratively work with China and help push things forward. So you all know that often high-level Chinese officials will say to their good friends and close confidants, hey, I need a little outside pressure to help me move things inside. That works in every institution, organization around the world. You can push and make things happen from within your own government, from within your own institution, but sometimes having something from the outside is really, really helpful. And if you kind of are able to collaborate and share that, it can be extremely helpful. One of the ways that this has worked, and we can all see it, is around air pollution. The embassy launched its PM 2.5 monitors. And really the first uptick in this was back in 2011. So in 2011, everyone started paying attention to it, and there was a big outcry, and the Chinese government was pissed. And if any of you were there, I'm sure you heard sort of a bit of anger coming out about this. It happened in speeches, it happened a lot of different places. But the embassy, rightfully so, was concerned about the livelihood of their Americans. They were having to pay major costs to airlift people out, And they needed to be able to focus on how do you take care of Americans. At least that was kind of the public piece. And I think because they've actually installed these types of monitors in other places around the world, that theory is true for the most part. Move forward quickly to last year, when PM 2.5 was registering 800. For all of you who had the lucky moment to be in Beijing in January of last year. It was special.
With your Darth Vader masks.
Well, you just realize when the airport's foggy inside. It's a little challenging. But what we're seeing now is that there's data out there. And not only is the Chinese government positive in meetings about the PM 2.5 monitors, but they're utilizing the data themselves, and that's how we know what's going on right now. And the amount of work that's been done in this area between 2011 and 2013 is really, really impressive. I don't know any other country that's managed to kind of put as many different things in place. Now, many people would argue that MEP hasn't picked up the full authority that they've been given to focus in on these things, but that's, you know, our government doesn't always pick up the authority it's given and focus in on regulating all the gases that they might be able to as well. So we want to, you know, that is an example of how you can utilize the U.S. government to really make a change, and nobody really thought about it back in 2011. It wasn't until 2013 where the data started coming out and you could see that the Chinese government was behind it, and even to this point now saying, thanks for your help on this. It's been really useful. And that's another thing that we haven't seen before. Usually we're just complaining about Tibet or things like that, and you just kind of hear the constant pushback from China. But this one, there's been a real turnaround. So I bring up that as an example. You know, air pollution is obviously on the mind of many of you who travel to China, but also just to say these things can happen, they can be very useful, and they do create long-term change over time. So we're looking to do the same thing. Around utilization of coal, CCUS, how we think about fossils. I would say some of the new technologies are really interesting. So we work with one company right now that has a technology that utilizes carbon dioxide. They can essentially take, if you have 100% utilization from a 2,000 megawatt power plant, they can produce 40,000 barrels of oil from that. And so this is a technology that's really interesting for China. The fact that you can produce oil, help keep other oil in the ground, and utilize your carbon at the same time, that's helping to move forward a discussion around carbon utilization that's there. So I think that when we talk with the Chinese about this, there's attention, there's a desire to say, but these are new technologies, we'd like to wait, we're happy to build your second plant in China. But we're not ready to kind of jump in at this stage, even for these technologies that are kind of in the verge of commercialization. We're not quite ready to move there. And so that's where the U.S. government can come in and be very helpful. One of the areas that we found quite often is a challenge is around doing your due diligence. So, and it's a little shocking for some in the U.S., but we're asked all the time, can you provide us some third-party reports? We really don't have the time to do the technical due diligence on this. We'd like to know somebody else who's already done it. So we've actually been back to DOE and said, hey, you know, for these projects that you're investing in, is there a fast track, a way that you could share some information with a Huaneng or Sinopec or PetroChina, whoever your partner is, because they're asking us directly for this type of information that if it came from DOE, they would be able to move forward much faster. One of the challenges that Chinese companies have is because they're a little bit concerned, they are trying to proverbially feel their way across the stones in the river, that they don't move fast enough. So the really good technologies don't sit around and wait for a Chinese company to do its technical due diligence, its financial due diligence, it's working through its own machinations of how that, especially for SOEs, take a long time to organize things. Those technologies are already gone. Somebody else around the world has invested in them. Oftentimes we get complaints from Chinese companies saying, oh, we've just, you know, we invested in this technology, we put a lot of money into it, and now we've built out our first pilot plant, we spent all this, you know, millions of RMB, and it turns out the technology is not good. You're like, well, it is possible had you not taken 4 years to negotiate the deal, and if that company had not been able to sit in Beijing to do these negotiations over 4 years with you, that you might have ended up choosing a different technology. So this is one of the areas that we're trying to help educate Chinese companies on, which is good technologies don't sit around on the wayside, and if the technology is able to be there, if the project is able to sit there and work only with you over a long period of time, it might not be the best thing. Market system does work around technology opportunities as well as other things. So those are just some of the types of issues that we're encountering and pushing forward. I think that, go back to what Ming had said, working in China, as you all know, is just like working with anybody else. There's a real desire for respect. There's a real desire to know that they're putting something into it. China's sort of been through now its phase of being the testing grounds, the laboratory for the world, trying to develop their own technologies, doing a fantastic job in many areas. CCUS is one of those where they're really one of the leading companies in the world is based in China. And they want to be part of doing things that help move the whole technical discussion to the next level. So if you're going to China just for the sake of selling your product, that's not actually the best way to do it. Best way to do it is to go to China with the idea that we're going to try to adapt our technology for the Chinese circumstances and see what we can work on together to move it to that next stage. Now, there's plenty of IP questions and other things, and we're all working together on a daily basis with the Chinese government to work through those. And some of it is choose your right partner, and I don't actually think that that's that different from anywhere else in the world to work in China. You got to choose the right people you want to be with. You have to be able to trust them. You have to show mutual respect, and things do move forward, not necessarily at the speed we're hoping, though. So we'll close with that.
Okay, well, good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that you had a picture from 1987. That was my first year in China, and I remember looking at that going, oh, okay. All right, so I do have some questions. Let me open up. Lisa, are you going to wait, you need mic. Actually, Lisa, I give you the mic. I actually have a microphone here, so intern doesn't have to run.
Thanks so much, Lisa Friedman from Climate Wire. This was so great, thank you, and so nice to finally put faces to names that I've talked to on the phone over the years. I wanted to sort of move some of this great technical and practical information to the much messier political level and ask about how this fits into the context of the 2015
Hold on,
agreement.
switch it. Doesn't seem to be working. Sorry.
Sorry. I wanted, does this work? Okay.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Wanted to ask about this in the context of the 2015 agreement. A lot of the collaboration that all of you have talked about is frankly not evidenced on paper. There's a meeting right now, one of these mid-year negotiating sessions, where we still see really stark divisions between the U.S. and China on how to move forward on an agreement to deal with climate change. And I'm wondering, maybe Taya, you could draw on some of your experience with state. Do you think that what we see on the international level are just negotiating tactics that perhaps mask real cooperation on the ground, or is it that the cooperation that is happening in the press conferences that we see from Secretary Kerry and President Obama and their Chinese counterparts on collaborative efforts mask a still really deep rift over how to move forward on dealing with climate change? Maybe on a more technical level, can someone speak to at what point China will be ready, you think, to reduce absolute emissions? And if that's something that we might see, you know, in the context of a 2015 agreement.
Okay. You can leap in.
Sure. So I guess the first thing to say is that climate change negotiations is a full-time plus job. And when you are a climate change negotiator, you are obviously always struggling to think about other ways that you can help move the ball forward. But sitting in those discussions around the world takes all of your time. And so it's very rare to have an official like Xi in China who also has authority for something else. You know, he's responsible for energy efficiency there. So the first thing I would say is that negotiators tend to be very distinct and separate from other things that go on. We know with the U.S. China relationship, we have to have concrete things and examples to point to demonstrate that we're making progress forward. So I think if you pull together every expert in China or in the US who works on climate change, energy security, clean energy, this whole package of sustainability stuff, every single one will say, yeah, we got to push forward to have concrete cooperation. Because if you don't have something positive to talk about, there is no hope for dealing with these much more complicated and difficult issues. So I don't think one masks the other, but on some level they're very separate parallel tracks. The 2015 agreement is going to push an awful lot on both countries to come up with ways that you're both politically responsible, but also focused on what your own country's needs are. And I think within trying to straddle that bridge, it's difficult to come up with things that also work for another country. So, you know, I hope everybody the best, and I'm confident that we've got great negotiators trying to figure out ways to bring this all together. But we need to make sure that this kind of collaborative, concrete cooperation continues on a fast track, because that builds the relationships to deal with the real issues around climate change over time.
Sorry if I could add to that a little bit. Is this also working? I'm not sure. This on?
It should be, yeah, it does.
All right, great. I want to start by reiterating something that Taya said at the beginning of her talk, which is that the clean energy dialogue and engagement is the brightest of bright spots in the U.S.-China relations. When there's some incident somewhere and negotiations on everything stop and they yank people from the embassies and all that, they keep the clean energy dialogue. It's the only meetings you're allowed to have. And there's plenty of other issues on which we don't altogether agree, be it Iran or Taiwan or what else, but clean energy is always open and always important. In that context, I want to say a couple of things. One of them is that much is possible to achieve outside of multinational climate change negotiations. We can't imagine that that's the totality of action. In fact, quite the opposite. Coordinated unilateral action seems to be a much better path in the near term, and that's basically what we're doing. As one example, the United States passes CAFE standards, China passes efficiency standards. Energy intensity is reduced, emissions are reduced. It's like it just works. And so that's just one example of things can be done. In the context of a 2015 agreement, I'm not going to speak to the actual agreement or where we're at, but it's important to understand that while a lot of people in Washington like to think you can have a policy debate in energy outside of the technology sphere, they're wrong. And let me try to say it this way. The history of this endeavor is that technology leads policy and technology enables the policy. If you have the better technology, it makes all the policy decisions a lot easier. And so we kind of can fart around for 10 years, and then we really have to, as a globe, start making very serious decisions. And part of what we need to do in this time is actually really develop and deploy, demonstrate the technologies, understand their costs, understand their performance, understand their market sensitivities, and use that as the anchor for the very large decisions which are facing our nations and the world.
Okay. I want to ask a question, since I have you here, because you know CCUS really well. I'm a water person, first and foremost. I do energy too here, and also a mom and all these other glorious things in my life. But in terms of the water footprint of carbon capture, use, and sequestration, I mean, China is, northern China where the coal is, only gets about 20% of their water. South-North Water Transfer Project, part of it is to move water to the north and in part to quench some of the thirst of coal, talking desal to get water to the coal. So I'm kind of curious about where, you know, CCUS is the footprint as big? I've pondered if any country in the world might make it more water efficient, it could be China, but I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because that's been a concern as a water person.
Thank you. One of the challenges in water is that basically water is free. And so because of that, it's very hard to use market forces to move decisions around it. In the context, let me speak narrowly in the context of CCUS and energy and water issues. There are other energy and water issues in many other places, but I really want to focus on just CCUS and water. Many people don't realize that done traditionally, the water use associated with CCS goes up quite a bit. Also, people don't realize that it is very much technically possible to have the opposite outcome. It is very much technically possible to make CCUS a net water positive enterprise. One example of this is if you're injecting into a saline aquifer, you can use the pressure of that injection to actually drill, to drive a reverse osmosis process at the surface. It cuts the cost of conventional desalination by 50%. The Department of Energy has been working on that for about 4 years. Right now we're looking for places to pilot that technology around the world. China is in what we think would be one of the very good places to actually demonstrate that and have that technical finding. In one of our large projects, the Kemper project in Mississippi, in order for that plant to work, they need to dewater the lignite. What that means is that that plant, as it operates, creates a 1/4 ton of water for every ton of coal they use. The whole plant is net water positive, actually. Another example of this is if you if you burn coal in either an oxy-fired environment or if you burn syngas through a solid oxide fuel cell, you generate water. These are broadly not recognized or understood, and we have had a hard time getting traction historically in this space. I think things are changing now. Issues associated with water scarcity have raised the profile of this. It's certainly a priority of the Secretary. He has asked all of us to redouble our efforts on energy-water nexus issues. Right now, in fact, when I'm done here, I'm going to go to a 17 National Laboratory Summit that's going on in Crystal City, and one of the main topics there is an energy-water discussion. We really want to figure out what's possible. This is also high on the list of issues in China. It is always welcome in the topic of discussions about how can we better coordinate and activate. So one should think about CCUS in a way in which part of the U can be associated with dealing with water issues.
That's exciting.
Let me add to
You
what
have something.
Julio said. It's that we have lots of technology. It's because right now water is so cheap, and particularly in the United States. We don't value it enough, then we don't recover. But in China, there are places that they would put high value on the water, then we can recover it. There are many technologies that reuse, recover, and net generate. But until you have a price for it, economic doesn't drive that direction. Technology, we have so many very innovative engineers. We can do a lot of things if it's economically feasible rather than technical feasibility. Technically, we know we can do it, but it's economics is driving it.
But so is that maybe going to be an area of your matchmaking as well, the water piece? I'm pressuring you. I'm pressuring you.
I'm helping in all those angles because there are certain areas in China, water is tremendously difficult to access, and getting some of our technologies. In U.S., we don't try these technologies because water is free. Why should we do that? But we know how to do it. So those are the partnerships we're going to grow.
All right.
Just one last quick follow-on to that. I forgot to mention this before, but the Chinese government just last month passed a new regulatory framework, an edict, in which no new coal project will be approved without a water plan. And that reflects, again, the growing recognition that this is an important area.
Okay, great. I've got two on this side. We'll go Ruth, and then the woman with the stripes. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to thank you for a really informative and thoughtful 3 presentations.
Can you tell them who you, I know you're
Oh,
Ruth, but they
I'm
don't.
sorry, I'm Ruth Greenspan-Bell here from the Wilson Center. Could you talk a little bit about internal motivation for this? Because of course there is an energy penalty, it's expensive. And I'm curious, not only just for China, but also you mentioned Saudis doing this too. it doesn't solve their internal air quality problems. So what's the motivation? Is it the utilization part of this that may be the motivation? I'm just really interested in hearing about that. Thank you.
That's a very complicated question to answer. In fact, it's one of the ones that we wrestle with regularly is what are the motivations to do something or not to do something. In many of the places where the Department of Energy does business, economics is not the sole driver. And we have to think very carefully before we put together a plan because we need to respect the need to understand those drivers as best we can. I'm not going to speak much about this, but I am going to provide a broader framework on which I think the global community is moving in this direction, including, say, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or China or India. One of them is that the technical findings around climate just get stronger and stronger. They just do. And technical findings don't go away. So nobody actually likes to clean their room, but at some point or another, you recognize the fact that it has to be done. With respect to the economic implications, it is easiest for a lot of countries to start thinking about this space in the context of utilization. It sort of salves a difficult decision and discussion. One of the things that I think has prompted renewed vigor and exploration in the CCUS space and the clean coal space in general is that as we have scaled up all the other clean energy technologies, it's become apparent that they all have their difficulties. Solar, wind, smart grid, ethanol, biofuels, nuclear. As we've scaled them up, we encounter the challenges, some of them expected, some of them not expected. They all remain valuable and critical technologies, but understanding their limitations, their challenges, their costs, I think has created a framework in which it's possible to reinvestigate clean fossil options.
Okay, yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for sharing all of your information and your time with us. My name is Kathleen Wade. I work for Dahlberg Global Development Advisors. We're a strategic consulting firm that works on economic and environment issues around the world. I guess I just wanted to probe a bit of a lack of balance that I'm reading from this discussion. We've talked a lot about the momentum behind new partnerships to encourage CCS technologies and other clean conventional technologies. We've talked about the new technologies available, possibly pressure from the Chinese public. But on the other side, I'm remembering the graph that Mr. Sung showed, the amount of installation that's going to happen in the next 10 years, and the map of the stars that Julia put up when there's only 2 or 3 stars on China in terms of the projects that are actually being implemented. What is your perspective on the emissions reduction impact of CCS in the next couple of years in China, given the speed at which they can actually deploy the technology and equip their new installation with the ability to capture carbon?
Well, the quick answer is there is no carbon price. So that's why the U is to put some value to the CO2 you can to it. Because you can capture the CO2. What are you going to do with it? You can store it underground, you can make it into something, but it costs money. So for industry, unless there's a government edict, there's a pressure or economic incentive or punishment, why would I do anything? So that's the impetus we need to provide to incentivize action. And that's what Julio is helping the government provide the incentive for people to do it. China, their leaders have more, sometimes economic incentive, it's there, but sometimes there's a political incentive. If they want to get promoted, they're doing something good for humanity, they get themselves promoted, there may be incentive. But not until we pass laws and regulations that require that kind of action, we are trying to persuade people, do it for the betterment. And it's a lot tougher.
But Ming Song, I mean, with the, last year with the State Council's Pollution Action Plan, where they were, they were more serious talk about coal consumption caps. I think they're trying to also accelerate, the carbon trading things. I mean, do you see any hope that there will be, an actual price on the carbon?
Yeah, as part of the, PM 2.5, I think Taya had mentioned the PM 2.5 start with the U.S. Embassy, but you might not realize that some of us almost got in danger, get expelled from China. It's literal threat. It's, at that time, the Chinese leaders almost wanted to expel all those people involved in taking that data. But that's a risk we have to take. But now that it's Chinese public is pushing the government, said, gee, I can't continue to breathe this air. We need to do something about it. So there are plans. What we are hoping, they recognize the fact that if you take care of the CO2, you will take care of the particulate matter, SOx and NOx as well. And one step is cheaper than trying to do a piecemeal. But right now, the quick thing is that we do it piecemeal. But we want to have the systematic to do that. And I think Chinese leaders tend to be technically oriented, so logic does provide them the foundation that they will do. And I hope they will accelerate, because U.S., Europe has gone through that, and there are many case studies we can share with them. It's the right thing to do.
If I can just follow up quickly with that, let me suggest that it's helpful to frame this discussion in terms longer than a few years. It took London 30 years to decarbonize, to depollute. It took Pittsburgh 20 years. It took LA 20 years. The idea that there's some sort of secret diet pill which it'll happen overnight is just highly unlikely, even in a technologically advanced context. We also know that China's announced that it plans to build between 400 and 600,000 megawatts of coal. That number's probably small. It's probably going to actually be closer to 600,000 to 1 million megawatts of coal by 2020. But again, I think that the idea that we should be looking in absolutist terms around near-term reductions is sort of not the most helpful focus. In part, the fact that we have abundant low-cost natural gas in the United States and shale gas developing around the world, that's bought us a decade. We should use that decade well. We really need to demonstrate what it will cost to undertake these things. And if we don't truly understand what it will cost to undertake these things, it will be very hard to get a decision maker to say yes. One quick narrative on that. In the United Kingdom, 5 years ago, they had a big competition for CCUS plants. They got their submissions and they pulled the solicitation down, because even though everybody in the UK government kept saying it really does cost £1 billion to do this, everyone went, yeah. And then when it actually came out and all the price estimates said £1 billion, everyone went, oh, it really does cost £1 billion. Well, now they're back at the table. They've announced they're moving forward with phase 2 for a couple of their large projects, because once they ingested that understanding, they still realized that they needed to do it. These are not sort of quick slapdash undertakings. It takes a decade to deliver a project. It takes a long time to get the policy right. There's just a lot of discussion, thought, engagement, interaction to happen. But you shouldn't solely focus on what's possible in the next year or the next 3 years. This is not even a marathon, this is a relay. And we're going to have to really figure out how to not only deliver as much as we can now, but how to enable the next group to keep delivering.
So it's, I mean, it's really, so it's more long-term for the pollution, so that the question that the short-term pollution problems, CCUS, I mean, that's, because it's going to take time. But are there, with this big outbuild, are there a lot of carbon capture sequestration ready plants being built? I mean, if,
That's a specious term.
okay.
My driveway is Ferrari ready.
Awesome. All right, no, but, I mean, you know,
Right.
but
No,
I
no,
mean, I get that
seriously.
question, and so.
Yeah. I wish I could take credit for that. It's David Hawkins from NRDC.
Oh.
If you look at the United States fleet, a third of the plants we're going to shut down, a third of the plants we're probably going to retrofit, and a third of the plants we haven't quite figured out because we don't know what the price point and the technology breakpoints are yet. And that's sort of crudely how we're thinking about our fleet. We don't know when that's going to happen. It has to do with the vintage of the plant, the kind of coal it burns, all these sorts of things. China's expecting someday they will actually retrofit existing plants, but someday it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. They don't know when to push that into which 5-year plan and how to manifest it. And quite frankly, that's not a simple decision. They shouldn't know how to do that. That's a complicated undertaking. And so as they continue to grow and emerge in their thinking, we'll know more.
Okay, you got a question? You have to have something better than the Ferrari ready driveway, too.
Mike Macetic, PBS Online NewsHour. Mr. Friedman, early in your talk, you indicated it was significant that the CCUS was, my questions are basically coming out of developments in the third plenum, that this was moved under the auspices of the NDRC, but the NDRC has gone down a peg because of the creation of the National Economic Council, which is going to be run by the president, not by a functionary. And so I'm wondering to what extent this may come under the NEC, this newly created NEC, when it happens. And then there's the overall question of incentives between one thing for the national government to say they're going to do X, Y, and Z, but a lot of the incentives at the provincial level and the state level are to produce, not to produce blue sky, but to produce GDP growth. And I mean, one minor example, you see, they can't even stop smoking over there because the government owns the tobacco industry and they want all the money. You talk about dangerous things in your lungs. So there are these various mixed incentives going on, and I just wonder to what extent have you read from the results of the third plenum and what's happened since November, changes in this direction?
Okay, thanks.
Let me first give 3 caveats at the beginning of my response. First of all, my answer does not reflect the view of the administration or the government. Second, I'm not a China scholar. I'm really a technology guy. And the third is something I'll get back to at the end, which is just there's a lot of change going on right now, so we'll see what happens. With respect to CCUS and the third plenum in general and the reforms that are embodied in it, the first thing I'd say is that I really won't speculate as to how that's going to pan out. It is a truly revolutionary set of recommendations and actions. President Xi and Premier Li are bringing a lot of things forward at the same time, and it's just imprudent for me to speculate on what that means. Second is that there is in fact a lot of change that's going on. In addition to the shakeups in the state-owned oil companies and this NEC, there's also things like the Deep Reform Commission, and it is unclear what that means and how it will enter into force and who will be affected. With respect to different metrics, the best signal that I can derive from this is that the Chinese government has announced that they will think of other metrics besides economic metrics as key metrics. That's a substantive change. Again, don't know exactly what it means, but it's a substantive change. And the last thing I'll say is the people who make decisions in China, in industry and in government, are in the positions they are because they've gotten good at trying to interpret these signals they get from the Chinese government. And it is not clear to those people what the current signal set means. They are really trying to understand which of the contradictory and conflicting signals they get is the core one. This is one of the complications of doing business in China, is a lot of what businesses do is they get themselves lined up at the starting line and then they wait for a while because they're trying to divine what the signal is. The space is complicated, it's dynamic, it is changing rapidly. Given that, I think even saying something like NDRC has gone down a peg is not obvious. So I would just encourage you to watch closely what emerges in the next 6 months to a year. I think that will provide a lot more definition to answer this question.
I would just follow up on that. I think that last point of how you're assessing and evaluating NDRC is really important. NDRC is right now run by a very sophisticated inside worker. Xu has been at the highest levels in the Chinese government. He knows what he's doing. When you come out and says that NDRC is voluntarily divesting themselves of some of their power, that makes me wonder what they're not doing. And what they're not telling us that's happening. So don't make assumptions yet. Let's watch and see. I think that the anti-corruption push has really sort of taken a lead ahead of some of the reforms to the cadre system. Sort of as you're talking about the provincial leadership not necessarily doing what the central government has said that they will be doing. That is really wrapped up in many ways with what's going on in the anti-corruption movement. And they are taking on some really big players right now. So again, I mean, I totally support, as Julio's saying, don't make your assumptions yet, watch and see. But some of these movements that are happening, SOEs being encouraged to take steps, Sinopec taking steps, according to the news, to sort of not have everything state-run. That's big stuff, and we're going to be seeing how that plays out over the longer term. I would say some of the announcements that came out of the third plenum are really interesting ones. So Rose New is here working on conservation issues. She'll talk about the new National Park Service, sort of setting up national parks in China. That's stuff that's been circulating for many, many years, and all of a sudden it comes out in this last third plenum. So we want to, watch these types of things and see how they're moving forward without drawing the natural conclusions that are there.
Yeah, Ming-Sung, because you don't just work with the central government folks, you work with more local, provincial level. What do you say? I mean, because you're working on this cleaner coal biz-to-biz. What are you seeing in terms of the incentives? Are they local governments kind of saying, yes, we want to do it?
Well, local government is just like very similar to our states. Each part, they have their people have certain, the regions have their certain incentives. It's just like Texas and Colorado may not have the same drive. So in China is similar, and the local government, and they have their set of incentives, their particular geography, and push and pull. And that's the reason sometimes they don't seem to follow the central government all the time, because they are there to take care of their people. They have their particular pluses and minuses in doing certain things. So I think what the current situation is that they're hitting on some of these provincial leaders for corruption, anti-corruption type of things, but probably it's more than that. They are political struggles. It's not that much different from our struggle between Democrats and Republicans. And anytime you push very hard, there's a reaction. So there's so much complication at hand that I think hopefully in the next few weeks, and certainly some of the things will be a little bit clearer, because third plenum is set the directions. And sometimes Chinese government does flow some trial balloons to see how it goes and the reaction. And then their congressional meeting, it's really define more of the steps, more details, how it's going to be implemented. And I wouldn't take anything for granted. I echo with
Okay.
Julio and
And another
Tyre.
question over here, this gentleman. How about we'll do 1, 2 in a row. You in front first, sir.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. Richie Tabachnik from Breen Energy. One of the challenges that we've had in the Chinese market is the lack of availability of natural gas. And so much of our technology that we offer is around blending gas and coal for cleaner combustion and several other economic benefits. The comment was made earlier that we're probably 10 years away from a gas boom in China, and I assume that means a distribution network and a market developed to use it. But is there anything significant going on in local gas development that may provide availability of gas in certain parts of the country?
My quick answer is yes. The pipeline system that right now is in the jurisdiction of the 3 major oil and gas companies. So, but NDRC has come out, says they will allow provincial construction of pipeline, not interprovincial, but within the province. For example, Sichuan province, they developing shale gas probably is the foremost in China. And locally, they probably has more local pipelines that is allowed. So ditto for some of those regions. So as an industry, it's a take a while, but it doesn't stop some of the locals. And the major SOEs, it's really a toll to allow some of these other folks to do things. And Julio and I are working with, there's a 4th oil and gas company called Yanchang. It's provincial, and they're doing quite a lot of things. And there's others to step into oil and gas arena. And we'll help them. Because in the United States, we got lots of small, medium oil and gas companies. We know how to do, and China is a new thing.
I want to just also taking advantage of having him here, because of your unique work that you guys are doing on biz-to-biz partnerships. I was curious about if you could say anything about the AEP State Grid partnership and kind of how, anything of what they're doing, and also whether this or other partnerships, how it kind of helps the U.S. side. Because some of these partnerships, a lot of times it seems a bit imbalanced that our businesses are going over there. Anything you could say to that?
Well, smart grid, in China, they call 节能减排, means energy efficiency, lowering the energy usage is #1 priority. And #2 is to reduce emissions. So smart grid is one of the focus that they want to do. And of course, anything towards a grid in China is the state grid, because they 85% of the total grid capacity. So AEP has a contract with DOE to do the smart grid. So naturally, that is a natural partnership. They can work together, learn from each other. And as previous Secretary of DOE, that's, Stephen Chu saying that it's very difficult for United States to set standards. Let's say the meters. Each vendor will make their own meters. Those meters may not talk to each other, but State Grid can order, is it okay, China has one standard and everybody have to conform, otherwise you're not selling into the market. So those are the things that we're hoping to help. AEP is, at the time, they're trying to buy the smart meters, let's say X dollars, but they can't get enough, whereby China State Grid, not only they can get these meters at substantially lower cost, and they have the muscle to tell the vendor, you're gonna give me by this time, or I'm gonna grow somebody else to compete with you. So those are the type of things that it really can work the advantage on both sides.
Okay, good. I just like getting a little bouncer, and there's a gentleman in the back.
Yeah, but
Oh, go ahead.
before that, I wanted to just add a bit to your question around natural gas, because I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of misconception, a lot of erroneous information out there around natural gas in China. China's begun to liberalize its market some. I think that's welcome. They have a long way to go. There are technical challenges to the development. There are structural and political challenges to development that are very real. China senior officials understand this very well. How you take action about that's not obvious. So those challenges are real. They're taking steps and it's making progress, but it is a tough lift. The second thing is almost none of the gas will probably end up being in conventional power plants. Most of it will end up as either combined heat and power for district heating, or for boutique applications in industrial sector, or for petrochemical feedstocks, all of which have much higher value economically than power generation. Even though there is a strong drive in the Chinese political circles, say within major cities, to replace coal with gas, and that is happening, again, there are 25 cities in China with more than 1 million people in them. Even if you did all the cities, it's not that much in terms of the whole economy. There's just a lot going on out there. It's still big, it'll still displace coal, but it's not going to work the same way. And when you talk about putting gas into a city, for those of you who aren't, bathed in the water of working in China, the best Chinese shale gas resources in the Sichuan Basin around the city of Chongqing. Chongqing has 28 million people in it. It has the population of California. There's plenty of local domestic use opportunity there.
Yeah.
And so it is highly unlikely, I think, that China will ultimately develop the kind of gas economy and the kind of gas infrastructure that the United States has, because it just has a different set of things.
The numbers blows the mind in China. Someone has a mic there, I see.
Yeah, hi. I'm Sasha Merrigan. I'm a master's student at Johns Hopkins Energy Policy and Climate Program. My question is about the cost and competitiveness of CCS in a number of different contexts. You mentioned, Julio, taking a long view of all these developments. So my questions are these. So first of all, is it competitive with natural gas at this point, both in the U.S. and in China? What are some cost reduction strategies you have moving forward? And in the context of the EPA endangerment finding, the Supreme Court currently looking at whether or not the EPA is able to regulate CO2 across the board in the U.S., pilot programs for carbon trading in China, we're likely to see, or potentially likely to see, markets develop on both sides. And 10 years in the future, when the natural gas boom that everybody's been mentioning in China potentially happens, the EU ETS may also see an actually competitive carbon market with higher prices, kind of dictating real investments and decision making. So in these contexts, do you see that CCS will play a large role in our energy spectrum? Will we be moving more to natural gas, or how does this all play out?
So a simple question.
Exactly.
So you can give a real simple answer.
Right. Let me speak to those parts of it where I think I can speak best. Today you can call half dozen to a dozen companies around the world, order CCS units, and they'll be sent to you with a performance guarantee. Okay? There is a lot of technology that's commercially available for new builds and for retrofits, and there's a bunch of companies that will provide that service. Today, if you do 90% capture at an 85% capacity factor, it still varies a lot in price as a function of the range of the kind of plant you're working and the kind of coal you're using in the market and stuff. These are very, very hard numbers to get your hands around, and it's one of the hardest things to speak about in a pithy way in public, because there aren't really pithy answers. What I like to say in public is that today's technology deployed in today's context at today's costs is about comparable with a new build nuclear plant or an offshore wind farm. Nobody's saying we shouldn't build those things. They're comparable in those markets. We are also helping companies develop and deploy technologies that we call second generation technologies. We've already dropped the nth plant costs in the past 8 years from $150 a ton to $60 a ton for capture costs. We expect to drop it to 30 to 40 in the next few years. Those will still need to be scaled up. They'll still need to be demonstrated. They'll still need to be vetted. There's a lot of work to go in that space. So our expectation is about on our current path to 2020, we'll be comparable with, say, a lot of solar and new build wind onshore. So in some markets, it's going to be the better choice. With respect to natural gas, obviously that's sensitive to gas price. But in talking to our partners and talking to utilities and talking to utility commissions, coal will continue to be used, coal will continue to be built, it will still be part of the rate base. Even assuming low-cost natural gas for a long time, which is kind of what a lot of the economic models tell you, that doesn't make coal go away, and that's good. We want the fuel diversity, we want the low-cost energy that comes with it. Coal is actually a really lovely fuel and energy supply, except for the parts that aren't lovely. And those parts are recognized and understood, and there's a lot of good work to be done on making them better.
I would add to that is that if you look at China, for example, building a gas-powered power plant is a lot more expensive to run than a CCUS plant because Chinese gas price is so much higher and it's not anytime soon the price going to drop.
Can you guys speak a little bit to the effect of a carbon market on that,
In China?
on CCUS? Sure, in China, yeah, or the U.S.
Okay, it's helpful to stop thinking about simple and easy things to do. China's experimenting right now with cap and trade system. They're experimenting with carbon market, but that's because they want to assess it in the context of one of many possible options. It is grossly premature to state what the impact or the long-term viability of that is. They're trying something out. In the same way that states in the United States are laboratories for policy, provinces, pilot programs, stuff like that in China serve that role too. I think it's more helpful to look at how many things they're trying, and from that divine that they're serious about making progress.
I would just add to that quickly that, having a price on carbon is something that we tend to say this is nirvana. But the reality is that if we're trying to push forward carbon utilization technologies, the lower the cost of that carbon, the better off we are. And that there's, in many companies that I've looked at, a third of their cost, of their production cost for their product, whatever that product might be, if it's oil or fertilizer, whatever it is carbon dioxide. If you're paying $65 a ton, which is what you have to pay in the U.S. and many places, that's costly stuff. And so we want to think, that's one of the reasons that China is an appealing market for carbon utilization. They have an abundance of carbon that they've been capturing. That is an asset if you have a product that requires carbon dioxide. And being able to get cheaper sources and being able to lower the costs of your carbon capture technology by not having to clean it as much or transport the carbon also makes a really big difference. So you want to just keep both sides of the equation in your mind as you're thinking about it.
Actually, let me follow up with something quick on that, because it harkens to the thing that you started with in your presentation. 70% of the energy in China goes in the industrial sector. And that economy looks pretty different than the United States. An awful lot of that goes to things like petrochemical feedstocks, which means there's a byproduct stream of CO2 which is already concentrated, already pure. Numerous groups have estimated that to be today at the order of 150 to 180 million tons of carbon dioxide that are emitted as a concentrated pure stream today. That means that you could do CCS for $5 a ton to $10 a ton in many parts of the country. So again, in thinking this through, it's obvious that that's an opportunity in that. China's recognized it. They're trying to assess what's the prudent path forward in that space. But it's my expectation that this will end up being sort of, sectoral development, experimental programs, getting their hands around the technology and the regulatory framework for that technology before wide-scale implementation.
I couldn't help, as you were talking, we just met today, so I didn't get to tell you that last August I went on what I called a coal safari in China. We took a group of U.S. and Chinese water and energy experts. We just went to Wuhai and over to Ningxia, and we're going through Wuhai. It's actually one of the smaller coal bases, and we drove for miles and miles and miles and miles and just saw all the different kind of coal-fired power plants, coal to liquids, coal to chemicals, and it's all really quite dense. And that to me seemed that's good for the idea of the CCUS, because you've got all this huge infrastructure to scale all together. That's good, right?
And much of that infrastructure is reasonably close to a place to use or store carbon dioxide. So, and that sourcing matching has been done now for the better part of a decade. Many groups, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory has probably done the best job at sort of mapping that out. But, these are very straightforward things to assess. It's still a very hard decision to make. And I prefer to reframe this in my own mind as the recognition that this will ultimately need to be done. And since it will ultimately need to be done, what are the prudent initial steps to do to give you the information you need to make smart decisions?
Okay, that's good enough. Okay, I think we got time for, we'll gather 2 questions here, okay? So succinct questions.
Jess Wilhelm, formerly with USDA in Beijing, and so I did the chicken paws part of the trade side. But my question has to do with agriculture, and is there a sense that you're getting from the Chinese government that if they want to focus on climate strategies, they might have to loosen up issues like grain self-sufficiency and water? And also in Julio's chart, you had a lot of different categories for achieving a lower growth trajectory of CO2 emissions, but offsets from the natural sector, from forest, from ecosystem, from carbon sequestration in soils wasn't in that. I wanted to know if you could talk about any of those issues. Thank you.
And just pass the mic here. We'll gather one more question here. We'll answer it together so we don't leave you out in the cold.
Okay, my name is Ping Zhong from the Chinese Embassy.
Hi.
Before I come to United States, I work in the Ministry of Science and Technology in China. So I got the privilege to meet Ming Sun and Julio in some of meetings regarding CCS. So my first question is, it's my first time attending Wilson Center's events. So is there a way I can get the slides afterwards?
Yeah, yours I just got, but we can post it. We've got the others online, and we'll get his online too in PDF. That's cool, right?
Yeah.
Actually, what I'm trying to say is not asking questions. I'm trying to share some information because I'm from China. And just in last week, Ministry of Science and Technology and Ministry of Industry and Information Industry will release a work action plan on energy conservation and emission reduction. There lists a lot of things Chinese government trying to encourage the industry and the government to do on this regards. Some of R&D and some of them demonstration. So if any of the companies, U.S. companies, are interested in introduce their technology and products in China, they can review this document. There's a lot of technology listed that China is currently needed. And I'm trying to share my thinking on this. Like China is a country with 1.3 billion population. So a lot of problem, if you multiply by this population, it's getting huge. Like Julio just mentioned, the success Chinese government have done on poverty reduction. Like in 25 years, almost 300 million people were relieved from poverty. And from Premier Lee's government report this year, just in the Congress meeting in China, he mentioned that China will start a war on pollution, just we did on the war on poverty reduction. So I think the Chinese government are serious on this, not only on pollution reduction and also on climate change. Like I was used to be in the negotiation team in China on climate change, on adaptation. So I knew the Chinese government are so serious on this issue. And thank you.
Well, thank you. Lovely to meet you. All right, so we got some good comments. So and remember the first question as well. So, and you're going to wrap us up here, people. So use this as your final comment time.
Why don't you go first on the agriculture stuff?
Sure. So on agriculture, we haven't seen anything saying that they're going to separate out from the current land use policies. So as you know, land uses, there is certain land set aside for agriculture. There's certain land set aside which is kind of mixed use, which you can go in many different directions, and then there's industrial use land. We have not heard anything recently that they're looking to change that. But that said, with so many different interesting technologies that cross over between energy and agriculture and water, I think there's a lot of discussion right now as to how you qualify different types of land. And that's the same discussion that we're having here in the U.S. as well, many places around the world. So I think we'll all be following that discussion, and it's a fascinating place to be if that happens to be your focus for the moment. I would just say in terms of wrap up.
But before you do, let me answer
Okay.
the soil
Yeah, yeah.
afforestation problem,
Great.
and then we can do wrap
Go.
up.
Oh, okay,
Right.
good.
Go.
So on the soil afforestation and soil storage, very few of the equilibrium models have it, even though it's recognized as something that's useful. In part, it's because the science is extremely complicated, and there's quite a lot of debate about whether or not it's net positive or net negative. You'd think that'd be simple to answer. It's not. If you store 20 tons of carbon and emit 1 ton of methane, then you've zeroed out. You're net equal. The role of afforestation and soil storage and, say, albedo change is something which is hotly debated. There's just a lot of churn in the science, and so it's hard to incorporate in an equilibrium model. All things being equal, it's probably pretty good. The other thing is most people don't realize what the real costs of afforestation and soil storage are. There's always parts of the market which are wicked cheap. Say in Mississippi, actually, afforestation is a super cheap and easy thing to do, but the size of those markets are pretty small. Scaled up, it ends up being sort of on the order of $50 to $100 a ton, and you only get a small volume of abatement as conventionally calculated. That's to say the McKinsey analyses sort of show that. I have not given up on it. There's also opportunities for things like biochar, which is something the Clean Air Task Force has been pushing enthusiastically, and I think it has a real role in all of this. But there's quite a bit of stuff yet to be done, and it's really unclear how to bring that well and comprehensively in the debate. Last word on that, as part of the regional partnerships effort, the DOE actually put a lot of money and a lot of science and a lot of effort into really trying to assess that. And even from our own efforts, which we think are valuable and useful, we haven't finalized our own thinking.
Well, I would add that, the phrase, the company I used to work with always said, think globally, act locally, because there's local environment, situation, it dictates a lot of things, what need to be done, and we, as Julio said, we really need to demonstrate all different solutions, and what's the real cost, and is that real cost transferable to another region. But the key thing I'm pushing is that we need to accelerate the speed of these things. I'm from Texas, so many of my legislatures don't believe in global warming or climate change. But the way I talk to them is that climate change may not be 100% proven caused by human activities, but there's a good likelihood. We buy insurance because the potential of danger. So here's a substantial potential that we will suffer from it. Why not pay the insurance now? And it's better for my next generation, for my grandchildren. So that's what I put some logic into some of my legislature, and it seemed to work in that sense. And I think we all collectively really need to pay attention by this insurance, because we can't wait. We can't afford to wait until we really see the proper. History, it's a good thing, but some of the things that we really need to look forward and act properly. So that's the reason I'm continuing to doing this.
Any other final comments? Did you want to say anything, or shall I just?
I would say just a couple quick things. One is, while we're talking here about the long term and saying this is not tomorrow's solution, there are some things that can be done in the short term. And we need to keep moving forward on that. One of them is looking at current power plants. Certainly in China, there's been a lot of discussion around this due to the air pollution issues. But you can do little things. Maybe it only increases the efficiency by 2%. But you know what, that's 2%. And if you spread that over a number of different power plants, that starts to add up. And when it's 5%, that's getting pretty cool. So little things make a difference in the short term, and we need to make sure, as Julio said many times, that you're moving forward in all these different directions at once and not just focusing on one type of solution over time. The other thing I would just say is that this is and has to be a collaborative partnership, I would say hopefully an unofficial one on some level, between governments and business and nonprofits and others, that everybody is bringing something to the table. And as part of your all of the above, everyone has a role to play in that. So whatever it happens to be that's your specialty, this is a great time. So right now, if China has some more capital to put into investing and more incentive to put into investing in some of these technologies, that's great. Let's find ways to enable that to happen, especially when, as in the case we're talking about with the Texas Clean Energy Project, they're creating jobs in America. That's a great thing, because you know what? We're all creating jobs in China, too, on a regular basis. This is a very interconnected economy between our two countries. And we want to make sure that both sides are benefiting from that. Chinese tend to talk about win-win. Americans are like, ooh, win-win. But you know what? That's what we're looking for, is something that benefits both sides. And it's very important for Americans to not give in to this idea that many in China will say, we're still a developing country, you need to bring to us and help us do things. Well, part of our job as Americans is to say, oh, no, you look at the technology you have over there. Why don't we make sure that that's something that we're benefiting from in the same way? Because we're going to benefit in the longer run, and we need to look at China as a partner in this process going forward. Not as, you know, it's too easy to have negative feelings and negative connotations if you are thinking of China as a place that we're putting our energy and time and money, like you're saying from the AEP, but actually the whole AEP deal, we're learning a lot there, and that's why AEP is willing to put money and spend time on airplanes and other things to get there. So let's just be honest about the types of relationships that are being established right now and recognize that they are beneficial on both sides. Otherwise, there's no private sector company in the world that's going to be spending time in China unless they can see a benefit. And that's the value of the economic incentive.
Before I say something, I want to say something. And that's, I cannot overstate the role of non-governmental fora like these. Whenever government-to-government discussion happens, we have to talk with the invisible flags behind us, and we are often constrained by our nation's interests in how to discuss and what we can say. Fora like these, business-to-business discussions, other kinds of engagements, provide a very vital platform in which to have a much free-ranging set of discussions, or a set of discussions that's much more free-ranging. And the value of that can't be overstated. It actually, those kinds of fora can generate tremendous ideas and actions from them. And so I want to just applaud the Wilson Center for doing this, and again, thank the panel and our hosts. Pursuant of what Taya just said, There's certainly a lot that could be done in the near term. You should moderate your expectations about what you're trying to achieve and why, but the bottom line is there's a lot to do. And I wake up every morning thinking, how do I reduce emissions in the world through clean energy deployment? And that's what gets me up in the morning. In the context of U.S. and China, the hard nut to crack is the one on coal. That's where we're spending a lot of our time and effort. And I think that the critical unit, the critical component, the critical action there is around these large commercial projects. We have 8 demonstration projects moving forward in the United States. One of the things we would love to see in China is a set of counterfacing projects, which is Chinese investment for Chinese ends to learn what China needs to learn. And then we share the learnings and accelerate deployment that way. If we get 8 projects up in the US and 8 projects up in China, that'll be about 20 to 30 million tons a year of abatement, which you get every year going forward. That's a good start. And more importantly, you feed the decision makers the information that they need in industry or in government to make sensible investments and sensible decisions. So I don't think of those as incremental issues. I think of those as the critical stepping stones to a clean energy future. And it's my pleasure and my passion to work on these. And I'm just glad to be able to work on them with people as awesome as Mei and Taya. With that, thank you again.
Thank you for Claus. So I often have my sanity questioned. I don't know if you know, when I go out and give talks and I'm so optimistic about China's environment, they're like, it's because I get to hang out, and it's not just in a little bubble here, but I mean, these are people that are on the ground doing good work, ever inspired. Now today's meeting, of course, is on CCUS in great part, but it also seemed to talk a lot about chicken feed. Just so you know that the next 2 meetings I have this month actually will talk about chicken feed a little bit, maybe. We're having a meeting, screening a movie for the Environmental Film Festival called What's for Dinner? It's about meat production in China. Don't eat your lunch first. And on the 25th, we haven't put it online, but we're going to have a meeting that I've entitled Surf and Turf. Think about it. All right, thank you so much. And if you're not on my mailing list, Mr. Embassy Guy, you need to belong to it. Thank you.